War films of the 1960s promised grit, glory, and truth. But what happens when ambition collapses into disaster? Some of these so-called epics drowned in bad scripts, cheap effects, or studio interference. Others dared to rewrite history so poorly that audiences laughed instead of cried. We uncover 15 of the worst World War II movies from that decade. And trust me, some will shock you. The Battle of the Coral Sea, 1963. At first glance, this naval drama looked like a surefire hit. The Pacific Theater was rich with stories of bravery, and audiences still hungered for tales of World War II heroism. The Battle of the Coral Sea was anything but heroic on screen. Instead, critics tore it apart for its clumsy storytelling, wooden acting, and glaring inaccuracies. The plot followed American submariners captured by the Japanese, forced into captivity before launching a daring escape. On paper, that premise was thrilling, but in execution, the movie stumbled. Dialogue felt stilted, tension evaporated into awkward silences, and the battle scenes looked cheap, many relying on recycled stock footage. Even worse, some sequences invented events outright, rewriting historical fact in ways that angered veterans and historians alike. Rumors swirled that the studio pushed out the film quickly to capitalize on patriotic audiences, sacrificing research and authenticity. The result? Furious veterans groups called it an insult to those who fought. Behind the scenes, budget cuts slashed planned set pieces, leaving producers scrambling. Scenes intended to showcase naval combat devolved into miniature models wobbling on painted backdrops. Contemporary critics dismissed it as television-level entertainment stretched to the big screen. Today, the Battle of the Coral Sea is largely forgotten, collecting dust in bargain DVD bins. Instead of immortalizing valor, it stands as a cautionary tale of how sloppy filmmaking can sink a war story. And in the shadow of real sacrifice, the film feels hauntingly hollow. Operation Bottleneck, 1961. Few war movies wasted potential quite like Operation Bottleneck. Marketed as a gripping paratrooper drama, it promised high stakes and explosive action. Instead, it collapsed under its own clichés, earning ridicule from both critics and audiences. The story centered on American paratroopers tasked with destroying a Japanese supply bridge in Burma, a premise ripe for suspense. But instead of taut thrills, viewers got a film riddled with one-dimensional characters, cringe-worthy dialogue, and combat scenes staged with all the intensity of a rehearsal. Soldiers cracked jokes in the middle of firefights, while enemies conveniently fell at single shots. Censorship didn't sink this one, but public backlash did. Some accused the film of reducing World War II tragedy to pulp fiction, stripped of respect or realism. Whispers spread that producers had no interest in historical accuracy, only in pumping out a war picture to fill drive-in slots. Production chaos didn't help. Extras reportedly doubled as both Japanese soldiers and background villagers, sometimes in the same sequence. Cheap sets crumbled mid-shoot, while gunfire sound effects repeated so often they became unintentionally comic. The aftermath? The movie was largely ignored, relegated to late-night TV syndication. Unlike grander failures, it didn't stir outrage so much as embarrassment. It lingers as one of the era's most forgettable World War II misfires. And yet, its legacy remains a quiet reminder. Even the most explosive premise can fizzle when filmmakers treat history as disposable spectacle. Submarine X-1, 1968. By the late 60s, audiences had seen plenty of submarine dramas, but Submarine X-1 aimed to blend realism with daring fiction and failed spectacularly. The film followed a disgraced Royal Navy commander who redeems himself by leading midget submarines on a suicide mission against a German battleship. A thrilling concept in theory, yet the execution was laughable. Critics mocked its wooden performances and hollow tension. The controversy? Historians pointed out that while the story was loosely based on real British operations, Submarine X-1 twisted details until it felt like a comic book version of history. Veterans dismissed it as insulting, calling the heroics cartoonish, compared to the true sacrifices made by naval crews. Behind the camera, trouble brewed. Budget restrictions forced reliance on toy-like models in bathtub-sized tanks. Word spread that even the actors felt embarrassed by the fake explosions and plastic-looking sets. The studio, desperate for a war hit, rushed post-production, leaving choppy editing that drained suspense. When it premiered, reviews were brutal. The New York Times dismissed it as plodding and juvenile, while British critics scorned it for dishonoring real service members. Audiences stayed away, and the film quickly sank into obscurity. Today, Submarine X-1 survives mainly as a cinematic curiosity, a relic of an era when war movies churned out quantity over quality. Instead of capturing the terror of underwater warfare, it left viewers dry, uninspired, and questioning why such stories deserved the big screen. The Long Day's Dying, 1968. War films often struggle to balance philosophy with action, but The Long Day's Dying collapsed entirely under its own ambition. Released in the late 60s, it tried to present a bleak psychological portrait of three British paratroopers stranded behind enemy lines. Instead, it became one of the most heavily criticized World War II films of its decade. At first glance, the premise had promise. Three soldiers, cut off from their unit, forced to confront not only the enemy, but their own disillusionment. But what unfolded on screen was a slow, pretentious slog. Dialogue leaned into ponderous monologues instead of genuine emotion, with characters musing about war in ways that felt more like stage poetry than battlefield realism. Audiences expecting grit got philosophy lectures instead. Controversy quickly followed. Some critics accused the film of glorifying pacifism in a way that undercut the sacrifice of real soldiers. Others called it a muddled attempt at art house war cinema that alienated both mainstream audiences and cinephiles. Word spread that distributors slashed its theatrical run after packed theaters emptied before intermission. Behind the scenes, director Peter Collinson reportedly clashed with producers who demanded more action sequences. The result was an awkward compromise. Bursts of violence surrounded by endless stretches of soldiers brooding in the woods. Reviews at the time were merciless. One critic called it the longest day's sitting. In the decades since, The Long Day's Dying has faded almost completely from memory. Unlike other forgotten 60s war pictures, it never developed cult status. Instead, it's remembered as a film that tried to ask deep questions about the futility of war, but ended up burying its own message in pretension. And perhaps that's its tragedy: truth, drowned in overindulgence. Attack on the Iron Coast, 1968. Produced at a time when studios scrambled to replicate the success of blockbuster war epics, Attack on the Iron Coast aimed for glory but landed in mediocrity. Starring Lloyd Bridges, it followed a daring commando raid on German fortifications during World War II. On paper, the premise promised edge-of-your-seat suspense. In reality, it became another forgettable entry in a decade crowded with rushed war films. The movie was marketed as a gritty, based-on-true-events thriller, but its dramatization bore little resemblance to historical reality. Veterans pointed out glaring inaccuracies, uniforms that didn't exist, weapons used incorrectly, and tactics bordering on absurd. Whispers spread that producers cared more about quick profits than authenticity. Behind the scenes, the chaos showed. Filmed largely in Britain, with a modest budget, the movie relied heavily on reused props and recycled explosions from earlier productions. Crew members joked that the Germans' bunkers looked suspiciously like sets from unrelated spy thrillers. Bridges himself reportedly grew frustrated with the clumsy script, though his professionalism kept the film moving forward. Critics were not forgiving. Reviews dismissed it as predictable and uninspired, with one paper quipping that the only iron here is in the audience's will to sit through it. Box office returns were dismal, especially in America, where audiences craved authenticity in the shadow of Vietnam-era skepticism toward war films. Unlike some forgotten failures, Attack on the Iron Coast did resurface on late-night television in the 70s, but not with affection. Viewers tuned in more for unintentional camp. Its legacy is one of formula over feeling. A reminder that when studios chase war stories without passion or precision, the result sinks faster than a torpedoed ship. The Secret Invasion, 1964. Directed by Roger Corman, the king of cheap cinema, The Secret Invasion promised espionage thrills, but delivered a chaotic, low-budget mess. The story followed 5 convicts offered freedom in exchange for carrying out a near-suicidal mission in Nazi-occupied Yugoslavia. While the setup mirrored The Dirty Dozen years before its release, the execution lacked polish, scale, and heart. From the start, critics were skeptical. Corman, known for fast, low-budget productions, tried to push into prestige territory with a World War II epic, but budget restrictions crippled his vision. Instead of grand battle sequences, audiences were treated to small skirmishes shot with minimal extras and obviously recycled costumes. Tanks looked like cardboard models, and explosions were so sparse tension fizzled before it ever sparked. The controversy came in its brazen rewriting of resistance history. Yugoslav critics condemned the film for its cartoonish portrayal of partisans, while others accused it of exploiting World War II tragedies. Whispers suggested Corman pushed the project through overseas financing, rushing production to avoid scrutiny. Behind the camera, things weren't smooth either. Cast members reportedly clashed with Corman over the rushed schedule, complaining that dialogue was delivered without rehearsals. Editing was done in a matter of weeks, leaving the final cut jagged and uneven. Released in both America and Europe, The Secret Invasion bombed critically and commercially. While Corman's reputation survived, he was too prolific to fail. The film vanished into obscurity. It occasionally pops up as a curiosity for fans of exploitation cinema, but not as a serious war film. Its legacy is bittersweet, an example of what happens when ambition collides with corner-cutting. Instead of honoring history, The Secret Invasion reduced it to pulp, leaving behind more frustration than fascination. Merrill's Marauders, 1962. At its release, Merrill's Marauders was marketed as a tough, true-to-life tribute to one of the most grueling American jungle campaigns of World War II. Audiences expected grit, realism, and honor for the soldiers who fought. Instead, what they got was a chaotic, uneven war picture that left veterans unimpressed and critics divided. The film dramatized General Frank Merrill's unit, a group of American soldiers sent deep into Burma on a near-impossible mission against Japanese forces. But where history offered endless tension and sacrifice, dialogue leaned into melodrama, and characters seemed more like cardboard cutouts than weary soldiers. The controversy came not from censorship, but from authenticity or lack of it. Veterans of Merrill's real-life unit criticized the film for turning their exhausting jungle ordeal into what felt like a polished studio adventure. The real campaign had been brutal, marked by starvation, disease, and relentless combat. The movie glossed over those horrors with heroic speeches and staged firefights. Behind the scenes, production was equally troubled. Director Samuel Fuller, himself a decorated World War II veteran, reportedly fought bitterly with Warner Brothers executives over creative control. Fuller wanted to depict the misery and futility of jungle warfare, but the studio demanded a more patriotic, sanitized version. In frustration, Fuller walked away from Hollywood for years afterward, declaring he'd been betrayed by the system. While the movie wasn't an outright box office disaster, its critical reception was lukewarm. Viewers sensed the tug-of-war between Fuller's gritty vision and the studio's glossy compromise. Today, Merrill's Marauders exists in a strange limbo, neither infamous enough to be remembered as a failure nor strong enough to be respected as a classic. It stands as a reminder of how corporate interference can strangle authenticity, even when a real veteran is at the helm. Hell to Eternity, 1960. When Hell to Eternity premiered in 1960, it was sold as a groundbreaking war epic, based on the true story of Guy Gabaldon, a U.S. Marine credited with persuading hundreds of Japanese soldiers and civilians to surrender during the Battle of Saipan. The idea was powerful, even heroic, but the execution proved deeply flawed and in some ways offensive. On the surface, the movie had all the makings of a patriotic success: an outsider turned hero, the Pacific Theater as its backdrop, and the promise of raw emotion. Yet critics quickly noted the clumsy dialogue, over-the-top performances, and questionable historical accuracy. The real Gabaldon was of Mexican descent, but Hollywood cast Jeffrey Hunter, a blue-eyed, all-American type, in the role. That whitewashing decision sparked backlash, even in the early 60s. Controversy also arose from the film's uneven tone. At moments, it seemed to glorify war with rousing speeches and heroic framing. At others, it lurched into bleak depictions of brutality, shocking audiences with sudden violence. Behind the scenes, budget limitations forced awkward compromises. Jungle sets looked suspiciously like California hills, and large battle sequences were stitched together with stock footage. Rumors circulated that studio executives rushed the film to ride the fading wave of post-war patriotism. Regardless of quality, the legacy of Hell to Eternity is complicated. While it introduced Guy Gabaldon's story to a wider audience, the inaccuracies and casting choices undermined its credibility. Today, it is remembered more for what it mishandled than what it achieved: a film caught between tribute and exploitation, leaving viewers with a strange aftertaste of both pride and disappointment. The Thin Red Line, 1964. Long before Terrence Malick's acclaimed 1998 version, there was Andrew Martin's 1964 adaptation of The Thin Red Line. Based on James Jones's novel, it promised to bring gritty realism to the screen. But instead of power, the result was one of the decade's weakest war films. The premise followed American troops during the Battle for Guadalcanal, echoing Jones's earlier From Here to Eternity. But where the novel pulsed with psychological depth, the movie reduced soldiers into stereotypes: the tough sergeant, the reluctant hero, the cowardly private. Controversy stemmed from its hollow treatment of Jones's work. Critics called it a cheap knockoff, noting that the adaptation stripped away the author's raw critique of war, replacing it with cliché-ridden action scenes. Jones himself reportedly disapproved of the final product, claiming it had none of the novel's honesty. Production issues only worsened things. With a modest budget and little support, Martin was forced to shoot battle scenes on cramped sets with unconvincing backdrops. Explosions repeated across sequences, and stock footage stood in for epic. The editing was choppy, killing suspense, while performances veered into melodrama. Upon release, audiences ignored it. Critics dismissed it as uninspired, and box office numbers were dismal. The movie quickly faded, overshadowed by stronger 60s war films, and completely forgotten when Malick's later masterpiece appeared. Today, the 1964 The Thin Red Line is a cinematic ghost, rarely screened, barely remembered, and often confused with its far superior remake. Its legacy? Proof that mishandling a powerful novel doesn't just ruin a movie, it erases it from history. The Guns of Navarone. Now, this choice may spark debate. The Guns of Navarone was a box office hit, even winning an Academy Award. So why does it land on this worst list? Because beneath its success lay a deeply flawed, bloated epic that critics, especially modern ones, have torn apart for its inaccuracies, excesses, and melodrama. The story followed a daring Allied mission to destroy massive German guns guarding the Aegean Sea. On the surface, it offered suspense, adventure, and star power in Gregory Peck, David Niven, and Anthony Quinn. But audiences looking closer saw cracks. The controversy came from its rewriting of World War II history. The Navarone mission never existed. It was pure invention. Some historians condemned the movie for peddling fantasy as fact, presenting an escapist adventure as though it were based on true events. Greek critics also criticized the film's caricatured portrayals of their resistance fighters. Behind the scenes, tensions brewed. Peck reportedly hated his role, later admitting he felt miscast. Niven fell seriously ill during filming, forcing rewrites and delays. Quinn clashed with crew members over his larger-than-life performance, which many thought veered into parody. Meanwhile, production costs ballooned, nearly sinking the project. Though audiences in the 60s flocked to it, many modern critics see it as overlong and dated, 2.5 hours padded with melodrama, slow pacing, and overwrought dialogue. What was once seen as epic now feels lumbering, a relic of a studio system chasing spectacle at the expense of substance. Its legacy remains divisive, a hit in its day, but, upon rewatch, a reminder that success doesn't always equal quality. For all its glamour, The Guns of Navarone often feels like a cannon loaded with blanks. Battle of the Bulge, 1965. With a title like Battle of the Bulge, audiences expected a monumental war epic, capturing the desperation of Hitler's final offensive. Instead, they got one of the most criticized World War II films of its era, a movie so inaccurate that veterans and historians still shake their heads. Released in 1965 with an all-star cast, including Henry Fonda and Robert Shaw, it should have been a classic. But the script twisted history into Hollywood fantasy. Tanks resembling Cold War patterns stood in for German panzers. Snowy Ardennes landscapes were bizarrely shot in sunny Spain. Battle strategies were rewritten to the point of absurdity. The controversy was immediate. Veterans called it an insult, accusing the film of dishonoring the men who froze and bled in the Ardennes. Even General Eisenhower publicly criticized the film, warning audiences not to accept its version of events as fact. That rare rebuke from the Supreme Allied Commander himself cemented its reputation as disastrously irresponsible. Behind the camera, chaos reigned. Director Ken Anakin pushed for spectacle over accuracy, prioritizing widescreen battle scenes regardless of credibility. Budget overruns plagued the production, and reports suggest cast morale sank as the movie devolved into a muddled, noisy mess. Critics panned it upon release. While some praised the action spectacle, most condemned its hollow script and fake geography. Box office performance was lukewarm, with audiences disappointed by a film that promised history but delivered hollow Hollywood bombast. Today, Battle of the Bulge is remembered less as a tribute and more as a cautionary tale. When spectacle replaces truth, the result isn't just a bad war movie, it's a betrayal of memory. Tobruk, 1967. On paper, Tobruk had everything. Rock Hudson as the leading man, George Peppard as a mysterious ally, and a plot inspired by daring North African raids. Yet, when it hit theaters, audiences were left baffled by its uneven pacing and confused storytelling. The premise followed Allied commandos alongside Jewish refugees on a mission to destroy Nazi fuel depots in Libya. It was marketed as both a high-octane adventure and a serious war drama, but instead of cohesion, the movie lurched between solemn political commentary and comic book heroics. One moment, Hudson delivers speeches about duty. The next, explosions erupt in the desert with all the subtlety of a Saturday matinee. Controversy struck in its treatment of Jewish fighters. Some critics accused the film of reducing their contribution to little more than a plot device, undercutting the gravity of their role in history. Others condemned the sloppy handling of Middle Eastern geography, with desert battles shot on cheap, unconvincing sets. Behind the scenes, trouble mounted. Reports suggest Hudson disliked the script, calling it shallow. Production delays plagued the desert sequences, and editing was rushed to meet release deadlines. What could have been a tight war thriller became a sprawling, disjointed spectacle. When it premiered, reviews were brutal. Critics called it dull as sand, and audiences failed to connect. Unlike other flops that at least found cult audiences, Tobruk vanished quickly from popular memory. Today, It survives mostly as a footnote in Hudson's career, proof that even major stars couldn't save a poorly built script. The Blue Max. 1966. Although technically a World War I film, The Blue Max was marketed alongside 60s war epics, and its failure bled into the genre's reputation. What promised to be a sweeping story of ambition and honor in the skies devolved into melodrama and tedium. The film followed a German pilot's ruthless quest to earn the coveted Blue Max medal. With sweeping aerial sequences, it should have soared. Instead, the flight scenes dragged on endlessly, padded with repetition, while the human drama felt flat. Critics quipped that its runtime was longer than the actual war. The controversy came from its glorification of a German protagonist at a time when audiences were still raw from the memory of World War II. Some accused it of romanticizing the enemy. Others simply found it boring. Behind the scenes, the production nearly collapsed. Director John Guillermin clashed constantly with cast and crew. Actor George Peppard, again, was labeled difficult, demanding rewrites that made his character even less sympathetic. The aerial photography, though technically impressive, ballooned costs and left the studio scrambling to recoup. When released, box office numbers disappointed. Critics praised the planes, but panned the people, saying the movie had wings without a soul. For decades, it's been remembered more for its model work than its story. Its legacy, proof that spectacle without substance leaves films stranded, much like its protagonist, chasing glory that never arrives. Battle of Britain, 1969. It was supposed to be the crown jewel of 60s war epics. With an ensemble cast, Laurence Olivier, Michael Caine, and a budget that dwarfed many contemporaries, Battle of Britain promised to immortalize the Allies' defense against Nazi air power. Instead, it became the ultimate example of excess collapsing under its own weight. The premise should have been unbeatable, the desperate, heroic air campaign that changed the course of history. But the film became lost in spectacle, drowned out character development. Pilots felt like anonymous figures, their stories buried under engine noise. Audiences admired the planes, but cared little for the people flying them. Controversy erupted over its muddled national pride. British critics accused it of Hollywoodizing their finest hour. Some argued the film downplayed Churchill's leadership. Others said it fetishized the Luftwaffe's sleek fighters. Spanish authorities, who loaned aircraft for filming, reportedly demanded certain German portrayals be softened, leading to whispers of historical whitewashing. Behind the scenes, chaos soared higher than the planes. Budget overruns nearly bankrupted the producers. Shooting was plagued by weather delays, broken equipment, and logistical nightmares coordinating dozens of vintage aircraft. Actors admitted later they felt more like set dressing than characters. When released, Battle of Britain disappointed. Critics called it a film without heroes. Audiences admired the aerial spectacle but found it emotionally hollow. Today, it endures mostly as a technical showcase for aviation enthusiasts, not as a compelling war story. Instead of capturing the human struggle of the skies, it remains a warning. Even the largest cast and grandest budget can't substitute for heart. 15 films, 15 failures. Some stumbled through sloppy scripts. Others drowned in spectacle, leaving truth behind. Each proves that World War II, with all its sacrifice, demands respect and punishes those who treat it carelessly. So, which of these disasters shocked you most? Comment below, hit like, and subscribe for more hidden stories cinema tried to bury.